evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are we all doing today? It's a bit wet out there. I don't know what it's like where you are, but it is raining all day since about 10 o'clock this morning here in Littlehampton on the south coast of the UK. It is Sunday night, which means it's time for our 6 p.m. get together, our chance for us gardeners, our veg growers, get around the computer, have a chat and talk about gardeners. And let's have a bit of a debate going on. That's what we like. There's no right or wrong answers to anything I ask. It's what works for you. We're a friendly bunch, so if you're sitting in the background or even if you're watching on a replay, please feel free to add your thoughts. We'd love to hear them. Now, what I wanted to talk about this week is what you would do if you would start your allotment or your kitchen garden from scratch. We'll get into that in just a moment, but first let's see if anybody is out there. I can see we've got Adrian saying hello to Richard and all. We have got Turbo Stream. Good evening to you. Chili Kate is there saying hi everyone. Perfect day for preserving. Indeed it is. Indeed it is. We have got Kate is also there. Another Kate. Good evening, Veg Army. Good evening to you. Stuart is there saying evening, Richard and Veg Army. Hope the rain suits everyone. It's filling up our water butts. Indeed. We've got Anna Jones also there saying evening, gardeners. Good evening to you. Nathan, evening all. Good evening to you. Hargrave Gas is there saying evening all. Hope. That's all we ended up with. Digwell says it's Sunday at 6 o'clock. Veg Grower video podcast time. Indeed. Hargrave Gas, evening all. Hope you've had a great week. Indeed, hope you've had a great week as well. Scott is there. Good evening all. Good evening, Scott. Hope you are well. I've been a little worried about you, my friend. Good to see you. Andrew is there. Evening all. Everyone just on my way back home, listening on headphones for now. Good, good, good. Sunny hope you're not driving. Anyway, so I think that is all the comments so far. Please do feel free to comment. Please do share your thoughts. Now, what I want to talk about this week is if you would start your kitchen garden, your allotment from scratch, what would you do differently or how would you go about it? This is something that I often think about. I often ponder in my own mind because there's always something I think we would change if we were to start from scratch. One of my biggest troubles is when I start, take on a garden, take on an allotment, I never want to change anything. I want to leave, not so much leave it as it is, but I don't want to ruin what is there. But I can sometimes work in a bad way. So what I would first do is what I've always done is just walk around the garden, walk around the allotment with a pen and paper and make some notes of what we already have growing there, sketch out the place, make a note of where the sun comes and goes, things like that. And then I would write that all down on a bit of paper, get it all drawn up, maybe on a computer if you're using CAD drawings or something like that, and just get an overall feel of what's going on. Then I would start making plans. Now, for me, it'd be things like where's the paths going to go? Where's the beds going to go? Are we going to do raised beds? Are we going to be growing in the soil? Something we spoke about last week. Where the compost bin's going to go? What's going to look attractive? What's going to look not so? What's going to look quite ugly? And how are we going to hide that? What plants are we going to want to grow? These are all the things that we've got to do in the first stages of research. In the meantime, while I'm doing that research, I would probably look at just strimming down everything, getting everything down to ground level, except for anything I want to keep. In particular, things that I would be keeping is things that maybe already have gooseberry bushes or raspberries I had on my allotment when I took it on. I would want to keep those, not waste those. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't want to dig them up and use them. Now, one of the things I did when I first built my allotment is I built all the beds out of pallet wood. And that was a bit of a mistake. The pallet wood actually did work, but it didn't last for that long. It eventually did rot down. And then we ended up replacing it with some thicker, better wood, which has been a godsend, actually. I got some reclaimed wood, which was quite cheap. I've got to replace it again, but it did work quite well. But one of the big mistakes I made on the allotment I gave myself 30 centimetre paths. I would give myself now 60 centimetres, which is when I redone it, I gave myself 60 centimetres. Now, I'll carry on in just a moment. Let's have a look at what people are saying in the comments before we carry on. Andrew is saying, we've had a glorious sunny day, rain coming next week. Aren't you lucky? Aren't you lucky? Turbo Stream says, after the 5th season, I am doing a reset, so nearly starting from scratch. Prime example then. What are you doing differently? What have you learned that you would do differently? Chili Kate says, when we started, we had 4 very structured beds for crop rotation, using the groups from the RHS. But this year, we're going to mix crop types up to use the space better. Actually, that's something I'm looking at, more polyculture instead of monoculture more. Stuart says, I moved my veg patch last spring, planting fruit in its place. I missed it. I now mix vegetables with my flower garden. Right plant, right place, hopefully. Good point. Right plant, right place. Makes sense. Rebecca says, evening, Richard. Hope everyone is well. Indeed, hope you are well. We're asking to know, what would you change in your garden if you could start again? Turbo Extreme says, I realised I was trying to garden like my late friend did on the plot before me. The layout was so... Where is it? I've lost it. Before me, the layout was his, so I'm making changes. I think that's important to remember, that it's your garden, your allotment. You've got to put your own stamp on it. It's for you, not whoever was on it before. Hargrave, I would try and not do too much at once. You can easily end up getting stressed because you overdid it. Starting more slowly, focusing on fewer beds initially, until established makes sense to me. You know what? I think that is a very good point there, Hargrave, actually, because one of the things that annoys me to a certain extent with our allotment, we have a rule that you have to have so much pollen to cultivation, a certain percentage within a few weeks. And actually, I don't think that's the right way of doing it. What I would probably do now, if I was to start my allotment again, is I would go around and just trim, or brush cutter rather, everything down to ground level, and then cover it all over with some sort of weed suppressor membrane to hold back all those weeds, reduce the amount of work that I've got to do later on. And then I would just start at the front and work my way back after I've got my plan in place, but building the beds, building things, getting it into place, but doing it slowly, but doing it properly. That way I would end up with less couch grass than what I have these days. I would probably have made less mistakes. It would be easier to look after in the long run, but certainly doing it properly, but slowly, methodically as well, and making things as we go along. So I agree with you there. Digler says, money is at a premium when first started the plot, so maybe we have to use pilot wood initially. Now, yeah. Now, again, I've got a few thoughts on this, because that was my idea. When I first took on my allotment, when I took on the kitchen garden, I didn't invest the money correctly. Pallet wood was nice and cheap, so I used that, and it did work. You know, I cannot say it didn't work. But I've got to say, since I've invested into thicker, better wood, the advantages have far outweighed the disadvantages. So I would sort of say, yeah, a bit more expense in the beginning is cheaper in the long run again. But pallet wood, you know, it's very easy sitting there saying that with hindsight. We don't have the money, or we didn't have the money when we first started our allotment anyway. So sitting here now saying that, it's not quite so black and white. Kate says, I am starting from scratch. I had to leave my allotment due to my health, and I'm now working to make my garden disability friendly. So your goal is to make your garden disability friendly. It's fitted in with what you're doing at the moment, with how you are working at the moment. It's made you rethink your garden. You're doing it in your own way. Turbo Extreme says, so I'm putting in beds with 60 centimetres paths and making more grass paths to lessen the load going forward. Again, that's a big lesson. This is the thing. When I built my 30 centimetres paths, I went for 60 centimetres when I redone them for the wheelbarrow. The wheelbarrow is probably one of the most important tools that we use on the allotment. It's a tool that we have to factor in when working on our allotment. So making the sizes makes all the difference. Anna says a visit community button suddenly appeared on Richard's YouTube channel. I've actually seen your elusive photo at last. Gave it a thumbs up. I don't know what's going on. I've got to spend more time on YouTube, so I'm still learning things there. Digwell says 50% must be tended to on our plots. Yeah, this is the trouble when you take on an allotment, and I understand they want to push people along, get it going right, but at the same time it causes people to rush and get it done wrong. Like I said, I would probably just cover the whole lot in weed suppressor membrane and just work slowly backwards. Another thing I would probably do in the first year is actually just grow potatoes with the couch grass that I have. And the reason I'd say I'd just grow potatoes is because they're really good at reducing the couch grass because of the way they the way they grow, and that would have left me with less couch grass now. And obviously when you dig up your potatoes, you're going to remove all those roots at the same time. So this is lessons that I've learned. Just planting potatoes, which is now part of my crop rotation, has worked rather well. Turbo Stream says, I made a fruit area a couple of years back, which worked well. So the idea is getting used in the new bed. Yeah, great one. Scott says, if I was to start again, I would give more space for paths. Mine are far too small. Again, that's a big lesson that I've learned. Too small paths are no good for what you do. Turbo Stream says, thanks, Emma. It was only visible on phones for some reason. I don't know. Digwell says, and pallet wood is free, easy to remove, to pop better wood in a few years. Yeah, as I said, there are advantages. There are reasons. It's just one of those things that when you stand back and now and say, I wish I'd done this and that, it's very easy to say that with hindsight, isn't it? And the reality is what you did back then isn't what you could have done. Stuart says, the one piece of advice I would give is the best you can afford, as we all have different budgets. Yeah. I would, with hindsight, reduce my plot to a quarter plot. I don't need a half plot just for myself. Whatever works for you. And Anna says, I'm going to try and make room for a seed bed to try and get things off the windowsills in the spring. I don't think it's a bad idea. A good cold frame or something like that to get your plants growing in the beginning. Now, this comes back to making those plans and incorporating that in your plans early on. This is one of the things I've always said, the biggest rule that I have with myself now is I plan things properly. I plan projects. I sit there working out what I want to do, what my plan is going to be, and then making lists of things. What do I need to do to get where I need to do? What do I need to buy? What do I need to have? What equipment, materials do I have? And I almost make nat charts at the same time to try and organize my routine, to try and organize my to-do list so that when I have a project I need to do, I can get on and do it properly planned. This is a key thing that I'm going to keep saying tonight is planning. But yeah, so where were we? So again, the big question is, if you were starting your veg patch or allotment from scratch, what would you do differently? Would you keep the same layout you have now, or would you completely change it? And my honest answer to that question is I would probably completely change the layout that I have right now. My beds on the allotment, all of my beds, but a few of the thin ones, but all my beds are 2.4 meters long by 1.5 meters wide. Here at home, my 4 big beds are the same sort of size, 2.4 by 1.5. I've got some smaller beds. And would I stick with raised beds? I'm debating that at the moment. I'm wondering whether I should have raised beds or stick with or go for something completely different. But would I keep those beds to that same sort of size? I would probably go smaller. I would probably only go a meter wide. The length isn't the the bad thing. It's the width, because what I found with having such big beds is I still have to walk across them if I want to get anything in the middle, for example. Now, I don't mind walking on my soil. I don't think it's as bad as people have made out in the past, as long as you don't walk on it when it's wet. But the trouble with that is it does make our shoes dirty, and it's not very efficient. One of the things I've always said my garden needs to be is efficient, as well as making it look good. So I probably wouldn't go for such big beds. I would probably reduce them, but try and have more of them. Reduce the size, but have more of them, so I don't actually lose any growing space. Turbo Stream says the biggest mistake was to try and make my plot full like magazine photos. I can't eat that much produce. Yeah. I mean, magazines are a great source of inspiration and education, but there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that goes on. And the thing is, if you grow more food than you can cope with, what's the point? You only need to grow as much food as you need to grow. Yes, I grow a lot of food. I do grow a lot of food, and I try and give it away to people and things like that, so to make up for it. But it's something I enjoy doing. Nathan says, I would have put permanent structures up earlier. Again, I agree with that. I do agree with putting permanent structures up earlier. Things like trees and things like that, they need to go in quite early on. And I've got an arch that I'm growing my trees up. The trouble is the arch only went in this year, and I've planted a tree next to it that I want it to sort of grow up and look good alongside it. But it's going to take a few years till it gets there. I think there's a saying, is what's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer to that is 20 years ago. What's the second best time? Today. So getting the early start, the perennials, the trees, the big permanent stuff in early is probably a good thing as well. But that again comes back to planning. Turbo Stream says, Anna, the best thing I did was make a seed bed on my plot. Turbo Stream says, actually, next year, I'm seriously thinking of just growing a few basic things and having a year off, so to speak. I will cover and mulch the areas that are spare. Absolutely. Now, mulch for me, we mulch everything. I'm a big, big, big fan of mulching everything. I'm using straw a lot this year, which has been a really, really big improvement on what we've done in the past. The straw has really helped, but compost is the best mulch, which is why probably one of the first things I would want to get into place is the compost bins, the composting, so that we can produce a lot of compost as early as possible, because we're going to need it. Some people will buy in compost, which is an option. But again, it comes back to that thing. It costs a lot of money. And I think we would be looking at nearly £500 if we were to buy in compost for my allotment. I don't have that sort of money. So I need to make as much as I possibly can. Digwell says the ideal width for no dig beds is whatever you can safely straddle if you don't want to walk on them. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. It was a thing I was watching. I think French gardeners came up with the thing that you would make a bed the width that you could straddle, so that you could fit on it. You could walk over it, and you could pick your carrots, pick your beetroot quite easily. But then if you're growing anything tall, you wouldn't necessarily need to straddle it at the same time. But yeah, that is a good logic. Scott says, if I was to do it again, and a common mistake I think a lot make is taking on too much. I think next year I'm just going to sprinkle lots of wildflowers and just grow this. So my thing is, wildflowers are great, but wildflowers take a long time to really get established, to really show themselves. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to put anybody off from using wildflowers. If that's what you're going to do, but you got to remember that they do take a long time to really get established. What I would do instead of wildflowers is green manures. You know, I'm a big fan of doing green manures. I use green manures all the time. I would use green manures more, but as a way of really getting the nutrients into the soil, breaking up the soil, and all the advantages that they have. So I probably wouldn't go down the wildflower mix. I would go down the green manures route. Turbo Stream says, I made 4 new beds so far, planted 2 with garlic and onions and 2 are mulched, and I will probably get covered in cardboard soon. We'll show you more about that later on. So, continuing on, another question that I would like to ask you is, what's one mistake you made early on that you definitely wouldn't repeat? Now, for me, it was the paths, making the paths too narrow. 30 centimeters was not enough. So when I started redoing it, I expanded it to 60 centimeters. One of the other mistakes I made is that I wasn't prepared to change what I already had. Particularly here at home. So I've kept my paths that were here when I moved in. I kept the sort of layout of the garden the same as what I had when I first moved in. As time went by, there was sheds that got removed and replaced. We got rid of the ivy and things have changed. And to a certain extent, that has changed the sort of feel, the layout of the garden, and changed the dynamics quite considerably. I remember when we had the ivy up, because it's sort of it created a barrier between the back of the garden. It added this really nice dimension. It made it feel like the garden had rooms to it, which is something I want to go back to. But it wasn't practical. The ivy was too big. It took a lot of work to look after, which is why we ended up getting rid of it. Would I stick with that? But the main reason I didn't want to get rid of that ivy is because it was there. I didn't want to rip out what the person who had this house before I moved in had done. But no. It's my garden. I've got to put my own stamp on it. It's my garden now, and I have to treat it like it's my garden. I want to change it to what I want. This may mean getting rid of paths. This may mean getting rid of trees that were here that I didn't want to get rid of. But I'm going to plant my own trees. I'm going to plant my own garden rooms. I'm going to make my own garden rooms, but it's going to be mine. It's not going to be somebody else's. It's going to be mine. What is the mistake that you've made that you definitely wouldn't repeat? Turbo Stream says, my mistake was believing that no dig was no weed. Took 3 hours to work that one out. Yeah, no dig does not mean it's no weeding. It reduces the amount of weeds because you're not bringing up the seeds and you're mulching things. But it's still a lot of work to produce compost. It's just a simpler way. Is the way I like to think of it. Turbo Extreme says, second mistake was wood chip paths that turned into weedy wood chip paths. Yeah, another mistake, I think. I mean, wood chip, again, has its benefits, and this is one of those things that if it suits you, stick with it. Don't listen to what I say. But I wouldn't have wood chip paths again. I prefer grass, because although there's a bit more work in cutting the grass, I see that as compost material. Wood chip paths, I have had wood chip paths in the past, and they weren't very good. The weeds grew through them. They took quite a bit of work to get them as going, and I'm trying to keep things simple. Ian has joined. Evening, Richard, and all. A bit late. Indeed, you are a little bit late, but nonetheless, lovely to see you. Turbo Stream says, the no dig was great, but the soil was so good, the weeds loved it too. Well, the weeds could be in the compost. This is the thing, is that the real secret to making no dig gardening a success in my eyes is being good at composting, getting that compost really nice and hot so that there are no weed seeds, there are no roots. That for me is where no dig gardening, or the secret to making no dig gardening a success, is actually you've got to be good at producing good quality compost. If anybody agrees with me with that, how would you go? What would you say to that? Oh, that's nice. I can't remember what's in that. Kate says, weed suppressor membrane under paths. Never again. Yeah, I'm with you on that. A lot of gardeners and allotmenteers particularly, they'll place weed suppressor membrane. Now, I'm not against weed suppressor membrane for laying down to reduce the weeds that you have. As I said, I would probably do it at the beginning if I was to take on an allotment again. But I would remove it as we go. And what I've had several allotments now, where we've been building and we've been creating our new garden beds and all that, and we've discovered that previous tenants have left that weed suppressor membrane and plant and put compost on top, and that weed suppressor membrane is basically in the ground, and it's really difficult to get rid of. It's not necessarily good for the soil, depending on what type it is and things like that. It doesn't biodegrade, and if not that I use a rotavator anymore, but if somebody was to use a rotavator, it could cause problems with that. So yeah, never forgetting weed suppressor membrane, like most things, they have a place, but they need to be used correctly. Scott says, if I was to start again, I would grow in a small section and cover the rest to kill weeds. Wastes a year, but not so much weeding after. Yeah, again, this is what I said. To do it slowly, do it correctly, but do it well. That, I think, is good answer. Anna says, trying to grow a lot of veg in a shady part of the garden was a mistake. Nothing grew, waste of time. So here's the thing. Everybody has shady parts of their garden. Everybody's gardens are different. And most gardens do not have full sun all day, especially if you've got fences or hedgerows that shade out a lot of the light. For me, it's how we can use those areas where plants struggle to grow to our advantage. So it may be we're putting in a wildlife pond, or we grow wildflower seeds in those shadier areas. Well, the other thing I'd like to think as well is what we could do with the shady areas. Excuse me. Somebody said earlier, the right plant for the right place. That, again, for me, is something that I try and bear in mind, is that we need the right plant for the right place. So vegetable plants that grow well in shade, peas, raspberries, I'm trying to think of some examples, spinach, lettuce, a lot of salad crops will grow well in the shadier parts. So again, please, by the way, I'm just sharing my thoughts on what you're saying. If anybody wants to disagree with me, please go ahead. Chili Cake says, my biggest regret is not potting my name down for an allotment sooner. Well, I probably wasn't ready for it. Yeah. I always believed, before I first had an allotment, I always thought I would never have the time for one. And actually, I found the time, and it's one of the best things I've ever done. I have weed membrane under the grass by my shed under the slabs. See, under the shed, it makes sense. But yeah, it's when it's left in the soil afterwards that I don't like it. Doug Well says, cheaper to use single covering sheet than weed membrane plus no fibre strands. Oh, silage covering sheet. Yeah. This is, again, the things that we could use. Or cardboard is pretty cheap as well, but it does rot down. It's all these things that we would say. Stuart says, I think my biggest mistake was thinking I could grow under a big oak tree. Every day is a school day. Indeed. Again, right plant, right place. And Toby Stream says, I put my soft fruit in a shady bit by the damson trees. Right plant, right place. Ian says, raspberry bushes grow okay in a semi-shade. I had a veg patch on the shade. Fruit was better. Yeah, absolutely. And Lynn says, don't grow or sow important, expensive crops close to the boundary to my neighbour's plot. That's actually, yeah, that's a very good lesson there, isn't it? Neighbours, especially if they use weed killer, could end up killing your plants without you wanting them, without you realising. So, yeah, another very good lesson there. So my next question, and this tallies up with something we were talking about last week, actually, is would you go for raised beds, no dig, or stick with traditional rows? And I'm still very flummoxed on this question about whether I would stick with raised beds. I would certainly go no dig. I've always got no dig, but would I go for raised beds, or would I go for traditional rows, or what? I don't know on that one. So what would you do? Would you go for raised beds, no digs, stick with traditional rows, etc., etc.? And if you could move your shed or greenhouse or compost bins anywhere, where would they go? And this is, again, another question that I find myself asking quite often, because my compost bins, particularly here at home, do annoy me, because I've got the Dalek compost bins. They look ugly, but I sort of pot them somewhere. I put them in on the southern side of my garden where they don't get much light, because I figured that was a good place to do them. And I tried to hide them behind the raspberries, but they look ugly. They look ugly. And I really want some sort of good looking compost bins. To make things look better. I've just seen over on Instagram, Ian joined and Jamie's little allotment joined, which I can see he's right here and says, "Hey guys, hello to you. Hope you are well." Ian says, "Wood chip paths are okay if you put a sheet under it, and you must top it up every year. Remember." Well, you missed out on our conversation. Remember, the chips break down. You missed out on a conversation earlier about that, but that's one way of dealing with the wood chips. But you got to remember to remove that sheet that you put under it when you leave your allotment or leave your garden. You don't want to leave it for whoever comes along next. Digwell says, "Surely raised beds are no dig." Well, people can still dig raised beds, so I would say no, because people can still dig them every year, just a different way of doing it. I don't know what's going on. Things are going difficult with our software today. Stuart says, "My compost bins are the best place for making compost, but they are in the wrong place when you're looking out in your garden. They look ugly." Exactly right there. Exactly right there. This is something that's been bugging me for a long time in my garden. How can we make compost bins look good? How can we either hide them or just beautify the compost bins? Now, I'd like to visit certain public gardens, Kew Gardens, West Dean Gardens, those sort of manor houses. I do like visiting those, and you never really see the compost bins. Now, when I was on the road in my day job, I visited, or we had a customer that was one of these sort of gardens, and I had to go down to the bothy to repair some fridges, and there I saw the compost bins, and they were, well, compost bays, not bins, bays, as big as my allotment. They weren't pretty, but I've got to say, they look so much better than what we have in our home garden. Digwell says, "Hardwood chip lasts longer than softwood." Yeah. And Jamie says, "My tea beds are no dig, been there for 5 years, never been dug." Indeed. So would you stick with raised beds? Would you keep your raised beds going? If you were to redo your allotment, would you stick with raised beds? And again, if you could move your shed or greenhouse or compost bins anywhere, where would they go? Now, in terms of sheds and greenhouses, I'm happy with the location of mine, except for one on the allotment I think could be moved further back or somewhere different. Would you plan in? You probably realised I'm reading off my notes because I made a few notes for tonight's conversation, just to keep the conversation going. Would you plan in more paths or growing space? I think we've kind of touched on that. Have you ever regretted where you planted a fruit tree or perennial crop? And I can honestly say, yes, I have with that. I can honestly say I planted. Again, when I first took on my allotment, I wanted to cram as much as I possibly could in. So I planted a hazel tree, a cider apple tree, and a cherry tree in this area where my shed is. And the thing is, that area was only 3 meters by 1 meters, and I squeezed these 3 trees in there. It was the wrong place. It was the wrong place. They were too close together. They were too squeezed in. My idea was that I could prune them to keep them in control. But it didn't really work. It didn't really work. And when I decided it was time to move the apple tree to give it a bit more space, it didn't survive. It died. In fact, I've just dug it up as it was time for it to go. Am I talking too much, by the way? Am I talking too much, which is weird as a video podcaster, but I'm worried I'm dominating the conversation too much. But again, as always, this is your show. You tell me what you think. Ian says Westdean has a big compost area. I'm thinking it's turned by a front loader on a tractor. Most of these places do turn it with a tractor and things like that. It's a good thing. And this is, these are the things that we could really do with. If with a big allotment like we have, the bigger allotment bins, allotment plots, not the compost bins. I'll get my words out. I will get my words out. I think this is probably a good opportunity now to go to, where are we going to go to? Go to this week's cook along, and then we'll carry on the conversation in just a moment.
Hey! Come and cook with me. Make some food with me. Come on, everybody. We're gonna make some food. Let's go.
Okay, so it's time for another cook along, and this week I'm cooking some beetroot brownies. So I've been out in my garden and I've got 500 grams of fresh, delicious beetroot. And all we're going to do is boil these until they're tender so we can peel the skins off them. Well, it's a messy job peeling that beetroot, but it's done now after being partially cooked. Into a food processor with 100 grams of butter and 200 grams dark chocolate. And we're going to just get that he says if he plugs it in. In this bowl I've got 3 of my finest eggs. I'm just going to give that a bit of a whisk. And then we want to whisk into that 250 grams of good old golden caster sugar. It does say to use an electric whisk. Really get some air into this.
A few moments later.
Okay, that egg and sugar is mixed nicely together. So much easier with an electric whisk, I have to say. We're just going to pour in and try and stir it in, this beetroot mix. Stir it in, and now we add 100 grams of plain flour. I want to add, we could also add a bit of get our dustbin, chili flakes if we wanted. I reckon that would make quite a nice mix to this. I've also got 25 grams of cocoa powder I'm adding in. And then we just give this a good mix. Make sure it's all fully combined. So we've got the beetroot mixed, all nicely mixed up, and what we're going to do is just pour it into this silicone baking tray, which I've already greased up with a load of butter. Pour it in, and then we'll get it in the oven. First of all, we want to make sure it's all poured in fairly equal, so that everybody who has a slice of this brownie gets an equal slice. Okay, we'll get out in the oven now. So it's been in the oven for about half an hour now. That perfectly clean, so that tells me it is cooked. We're just going to leave that to cool, and then we'll see what it tastes like back in the studio. But boy, does it look good. I'm kind of really pleased with myself. As you can see, here are the chocolate brownies. They turned out really, really well. I'm really, really pleased with how they look. But as you know, looking the part is only half of the journey. What do they taste like? Mm. Oh my God, these are good. These are good. I cannot fault these beetroot and chocolate brownies at all. So what do I score? Excuse me, eating that with my mouth full. What do I score them out of 10? I'm going to give those a 10 out of 10, which is not a score I give them very often, but when I'm impressed, I'll give it. So back to the comments quickly and the discussion about what would you do if you would start your allotment again. And Tab Extreme says, I've actually learned a lot this last 5 years. After all, we didn't know much when we started out, so we might make the same mistakes again. This is the thing. Sometimes it's always good to look back. One of the problems that we do as gardeners is that we're not working in many different gardens unless you're a professional. So we tend to stick with the same garden, and we're sometimes reluctant to rip everything up and start again. But sometimes that's where we learn things. Stuart says, I'm thinking about getting a hot bin to help making the compost as well. They do look a bit better. I'm with you on that. I've got a hot bin. I think my discount code still works at the moment. If you are looking to get a hot bin, I do have a discount code. They're basically an insulated compost bin. They do produce some really good compost, fast and really, really good. So, and I think they also look better than Dalek compost bins. So I'm a big fan of those. I've got to say, would I have more than one? Yeah, I probably would actually. I probably would. Rob says, good evening all from the pub in Trevone. Where's Trevone? Where's that? I'm not familiar with that. Hi, Janice says Digwell. People saying hello to Rob. What else have we got? This bloody thing. Sorry, I'm being rude there. Rob says, not staying long. Don't want my beer to get warm. Nothing worse than warm beer, is there? What have we got? What have we got? Chili Phil says, hashtag cook along, pumpkin bread. Ooh, that's a good one. Don't forget, we need your suggestions for cook along and a mission. Just hashtag cook along or hashtag mission, and you'll be into the draw. Tabo Stream says, looks nice. It is very nice. It is really nice. That is really, really nice. Jamie says, "Oh, hot bins open at the bottom." No, they're not. They're not. They actually collect the liquid to use as a plant feed. They're not open at the bottom, so they don't use worms for the composting process. It is done through the heat and the bacteria breaking everything down, which can be a good thing. It means you're less likely to get weed seeds surviving the composting process. So that's one of the advantages of hot bins, is they contain that heat for longer and really break your compost down. It's in Cornwall. Never heard of it before, so I'd never heard of it. So that's a new one. And Digwell says, too pricey for me, the hot bin. That is the downside. That is the downside. They are pricey, but they do look, in my opinion, I think they're good. In my opinion, if you can afford them, they are worth it. I can't remember my discount code that I have for them, but I'm going to have to get them on the podcast soon anyway. Turbo Stream says, I made a glut-friendly flapjack this week. Might look at the brownies too. Give them a try. If you've got loads of beetroot, which we do have loads of beetroot, give it a try. Give it a try. It is absolutely delicious. Now back to what you would do differently if you would start your allotment. Again, I asked the question, have you regretted where you planted a fruit tree or perennial crop? And I didn't get any answers on that, so I'm guessing you haven't really. But what is the one thing you wish you had built sooner? Water collection, compost bays, cold frame? I'd probably say cold frame on the allotment. I don't actually have a cold frame on the allotment, and a few years ago I added the greenhouses. I wish the greenhouses had gone in sooner because they have opened up lots of things for me, lots of opportunities. I think I've said before, I'm not a fan of polytunnels. I'm not saying I'm not saying that I have anything against polytunnel. Well, they just haven't worked for me. And I don't know if I would ever have a polytunnel on the allotment again, but they haven't worked for me. But the greenhouses, I prefer. Windy site. Don't forget, I'm quite close to the seafront here. So in this, you spend a lot of money on a polytunnel. And again, actually, that's a good point. Something I've done in the past on my old allotment is I bought 2 polytunnels, one after the other, which were fairly cheap polytunnels. They were not expensive polytunnels. They were sub £100, which over 10 years ago now, they were like the Wilkinson special type polytunnel things. And they were too weak. They didn't resist any strength, any wind, and I would never buy those again for that very reason. They didn't last a season, and they blew over all my plants that I had on the inside. So if I was to go through and have a polytunnel again, I would spend a bit of money. We're looking probably these days £500 for a polytunnel. But it would be strong. It would be built to last, as opposed to these cheap ones. So that's one thing I would probably say. One thing I've learned that I would probably do differently. I would not have the cheap polytunnels. Again, this is something we said earlier. You know, not everybody has money, and when you're trying to do things on a budget, on a shoestring budget, you have to make do with what you have. But sometimes it's best to save a little bit longer and get what you need than trying to scrimp and then try and buy cheap. Yeah, that makes sense in my head. I just can't put it into words very well. Turbo Stream says, I've regretted planting 4 red currants from cuttings. Will be taken out this year. Yeah, good answer. Good answer. And Jamie says, I've got 2 polycarbonate polytunnels and they are brilliant. Are they like the bus shelter type polytunnels where they're not a flexible material? They're more of a sheeted material. I've seen those around. I've not got any myself, but I've seen them around. Over on Instagram, Scrapyard Drocker has joined. Welcome along. Lovely to see you. Anything else? What would you do differently that you've learned from your experience of growing your own? What would you do differently? I'm going to throw that out to you guys because I think I've listed everything that I've learned, but I'm sure there's many more things. And sometimes it doesn't come until we discuss it. But guess what? I guess as we start to close this question down, what would you give, or what one bit of advice would you give somebody just starting their first allotment? What would it be? What would you give, one bit of advice you would give to somebody starting their first allotment? And looking back, do you think experience or enthusiasm matters more when starting out? I'm going to say enthusiasm. Enthusiasm matters more. Experience does count for a lot, don't get me wrong, but enthusiasm helps a bucket loads. So yeah, what bit of advice you would give somebody starting their first allotment, and do you think experience or enthusiasm is more important? Turbo Stream says, I wasted £45 on cheap flimsy cold frame. I might try and strengthen it ready for next year. Yeah, again, I don't like cheap flimsy cold frames or anything like that, so I'm not a fan. Andrew says, I would have planted a large gap between each of the apple trees I planted. Yeah, that's a good lesson learned there, actually. Sometimes plant spacing is a big learning curve, isn't it? Sometimes you plant things too close and not enough space around them, and you learn it doesn't work. This, again, it comes where I think when we're new, we're young, we're full of enthusiasm, we try and squeeze things in to make the most of the space that we have. And it's not until you get that experience you learn that you don't need to do that, or it's better to not do that. Which again, it comes back to that question: experience or enthusiasm matters the most. Andrew then says, I would say smell the soil. If the smell of freshly dug soil does not excite you, then you'll have your work cut out for you. I think that's a good thing to point actually. How important is the soil? The soil is one of the most important things we need for gardeners, for good gardening. Soil. Enthusiasm keeps you going at first. Experience keeps you going where many give in too easily. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That is a good way of putting it. Enthusiasm counts at the beginning. Experience when keeps you going. Yeah. I mean, the reason I say I think enthusiasm is more important than experience is that I firmly believe, and I tell all my apprentices this, you learn more by making mistakes. You learn more from making mistakes. And that's why I think enthusiasm counts a lot, because you can make mistakes. And there's nothing wrong with making mistakes at all, as long as you learn from them. And learning from your mistakes is where we learn the most. I'm a big proponent of that, as you probably can gather, as long as you learn from it. As long as you learn from making your mistakes. Right. It's a bit early to go into the mission. I haven't actually got a video for the mission because I'll talk to you about that in just a moment. I'm just trying to see if I've missed any comments. Jamie says, yes, twin wall plastic about the polytunnel. Is it like a bus shelter type thing? Yeah, it must be. I mean, I'm trying to get twin wall polycarbonate from my greenhouse down on the allotment because I think it's going to be better than glass. But twin wall polycarbonate, see, to me, seems going to be a bit better than glass. Digwell says, he who hasn't made a mistake hasn't made anything. Absolutely. And this is, I find this particularly with younger people these days, when they're just out of school, they're afraid to make mistakes. I don't know what's going on. I'm not going to run anybody down and run my own mind on why that happens. But I think youngsters are so scared of making mistakes that they are afraid to try because they don't want to make a mistake. Does that make sense? Chili Phil says, I think if you're a bomb disposal officer, it's probably best not to learn from your mistakes, learn from others' mistakes. Yeah, okay. I think you have a valid argument there, but if you're making mistakes in simulation, that's okay. That's where you learn from your mistakes in simulation. It's when it comes down to the real thing. But yeah, you have made a very valid argument. But how many bomb disposal experts do you know? I'm probably going to get flagged up for that one now. Tabby Stream says, only sow what you like to eat, as has been discussed many times. You can waste energy on growing. Oh, I hate this. crops you don't eat. I think that's certainly true. We go through periods where we get these fad crops. Kale went through a period where it was suddenly a fad crop. It was a superfood, and cucamelons and things like that. And yet everybody I've spoken to is like, yeah, we grew it once, didn't really like it, never bothered again, which is all well and good giving it a try. But is there any point if you don't eat them? I think that's valid. Very, very valid. Don't know why I sowed garlic this winter though, because garlic is good. I like growing garlic, but that's me personally. That's the turbo stream there. And Stuart says, has anyone ever made a hot bin? Mistake is how we learn. I say this all the time at school. So I have made a type of hot bin. Down on my allotment, I have made a type of hot bin, and I made it out of some old fridge doors. Now, obviously, in my line of work, it's easy for me to come across fridge doors. And all I did is I made this bin. It's actually not strictly a hot bin, but the doors are insulated. I just made a rectangle like a normal bin, and then I've taken some more doors and placed that on top to trap in some of the heat. So it is like a hot bin, but it's not a hot bin, but it could certainly work. I mean, I have been talking at work because one of the things we have to discuss at work, if you don't know, I'm sure most of you know by now, but I work in refrigeration. But when we're building our new fridges, we have to think more about end of life now. And I've been looking at them and saying, well, we could turn those into hot bin. If we can get something that slides in, boxes that slide in, we could put a compost in there, compost material, and create our own hot bins, which is something I'd like to explore. Digwell says, anyone can make a mistake. Only a fool makes the same mistake twice. LOL. Indeed. Yeah. And that's the point. Anyone can make a mistake. It's as long as you learn. Turbo Stream says, but you might then discover a crop you do like, so perhaps you need to try and see. Yeah, it's all about the energy, all about whether you have the energy or the space and things like that. Or if you can try a crop before you grow it, that might be a way around it. That being said, when you grow your own, it often tastes better anyway. Jamie says, I'm preparing kale now for dinner. Yummy. I do like kale. I know somebody out there doesn't like kale, though. And Turbo says, well, I still don't like garlic. Why are you growing it if you don't like it then? Each their own, though. Anna says, I keep thinking that I might try and make a hot bin from bubble wrap or polystyrene packaging around a garlic bin. Not tried it yet, though. That might be a simple way. Bubble wrap around a garlic compost bin. That might be a simple way to do it. Yeah, I can see that working. Stuart says, my garlic this autumn is coming straight from Tesco's. The children wanted to try growing items we get from a shop. It works. It works. I shouldn't recommend it, but I've grown garlic from supermarket. It works. So it works. Other things, potatoes, and go down the spice aisles and buy some of the seeds. I'm trying to think of some examples. Cardamom pods, you can grow those from, if you're lucky, try growing those from stuff bought from supermarket. Goji berries, I think you can buy those seeds down that same aisle. Things like that. Lots of things going on. Said there was somebody that doesn't like the K word, and he says stop swearing. Indeed. Terry, I planted garlic to see if it grew. 89p from Lidl, not much to lose. No, indeed. Okay, so I think it is now time to talk about this week's mission of the week. Last week, you set me the mission to find horseradish seeds, and I've been searching all week, and I haven't got a video to show you because I have been searching. I found nowhere that sells horseradish seeds. I can find horseradish thongs, little pieces of root. I can find plenty of places that sell that, but not horseradish seeds. So what that tells me is perhaps it's not possible to grow from seed, or it's not very viable to grow from seed. But Nonetheless, it would be interesting to see why we can't grow, why it doesn't sell it from seed. But thongs, these little pieces of root, I could find loads of those. Premier Seeds Direct, Saturns, Moles, you name it, I could find it. But not seeds, not seeds. So that is a mission failed because I could not find it. Don't forget, if you need a mission or suggest a mission for next week with hashtag mission. I've read that one. Idaho has joined. Sorry I'm late. Hello, Richard and chat. Hello to you. Hope you are well. And Stuart says, I think I'm going to try to make a hot bin at school with children. My school budget doesn't go as far as that. They aren't cheap. They aren't cheap, but there are, as we've explored, there are ways of making your own hot bins if you have access to the right materials. I'd be interested to see how it works. I've got a few ideas. But I cannot disclose those at the moment. Now, has anyone grown horseradish before, and how did it go? It's a question I'm going to ask you because I do grow a horseradish on my allotment. We spoke about this a bit last week, but I know when you grow it in the ground or in a pot, it can be a bit of a spreader, which makes me wonder why it's so difficult to get the seeds. Because surely if it spreads, the seeds are sprouting all over the place. Or perhaps it's because the root cuttings are so strong. So have you grown horseradish before, and how did it go? And where did you get your horseradish from? Quick check on Instagram. Nothing going on over there. Stuart Jackson, hashtag mission, make a hot bin. I've got an option for that. Digwell says, all of my horseradish was grown from seeds. Sold 20 lots and planted 3 myself. Maybe a market for me with the seeds too. It may be a market. I think there is, based on what I've seen this week, I think there is a market for horseradish seeds. So if you can get some horseradish seeds, it may be a market. But obviously, make sure you do all relevant legal things. Don't take my word on it. Chili Cake says, the horseradish farmer I worked with only grew from the previous year's root. Interesting. Waiting to harvest my first horseradish root was from a colleague's garden. Yeah, I said, excuse me, I've got some horseradish growing on my allotment. I can't wait to dig up, except it's growing underneath my greenhouse, so it's in a real difficult area. But I want to see if we can dig that up and see if we can try and salvage some of the roots and see how we get on with that. Jamie says, just to let you know, I'm chopping up my last butternut squash from this year. Perfect timing because I've just harvested this year's. Perfect winter squash, that one. The stores for a long time. You know, next year I'm having a big push to grow more squash for winter. I want to have a larder full or a garage full of squashes going into the winter. Toby Stream says, I remember my first go at growing vegetables at home was a disaster, and it was short, shady, faces north, with high trees and blacktails, fences, and no hedges. Well, it's changed now, so you never know. Stuart says, sorry, Richard, if you make one first, then I can use your video as a learning aid. LOL. Yeah, okay. I've got an idea of something I want to do. So we'll see how it works. Digwell says legal things. I'll just save the seeds and sell them. It's the selling of seeds. That's when I say legal things, because there are certain rules in place which I think is overkill. If you're selling seeds, you know. Turbo Sue says, so experience taught me you need plenty of light to successfully grow some vegetables. Yeah, It's certainly true. But who really, on that note, who really has a garden in full sun? Make a cheap hot bin. Yeah, who really has a garden that books tell you every vegetable needs full sun? Who really has that? I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody. Now, there. So we mentioned squash just now, actually, and one of the questions or one of the notes I've just looked over, I forgot to ask you, is what is one crop you wish you'd grown more of this year? And it's certainly for me, squashes. We've done all right with pumpkins and butternut squashes, but I wish we had grown more. Do you have any crops that you wish you had grown more of this year? And what is still producing well for you right now? And I say that because wind and rain has came in this weekend, but I was out in my garden earlier today and I'm still getting courgettes. My greenhouse is still producing chilies and aubergines and things like that. And I'm really surprised at that because it's this sort of time of year where you think things are going to slow down, but it's unusually warm, I feel, for this time of year. And I say that because I am on the south coast, so I'm kind of in luxury, really, because we do get a late winters here. But this year just seems exceptionally warm. And with all the complaints I've had about the weather this year, it doesn't seem like the thing to really complain about. Turbo Stu says, my allotment is full sun or as near as you can get to it. Yeah, this is what I mean. Allotment is probably full sun, but who has a plot at home that is in full sun? Idaho says, I jumped over to my online list of seed companies and the only one I saw sells horseradish seeds. Rest of them sell roots. Actually, that is a good point. I did find one place that sold the seeds, but they were in the US, and again, importing into the UK is full of large problems. So there was one place, but it wasn't for the UK. Chili Cake says, would you pot a greenhouse somewhere that only gets a few hours direct sun or not bother? So I would pot it where it is going to get a few hours of direct sun. The greenhouse is not necessarily about getting the most light, although it helps. It's about extending the seasons. It's about holding on to the heat as well as trying to make the most of it. So it's not necessarily for getting the most amount of light, but it does help. It's also for getting holding on to heat and just extending the seasons as possible. Stuart says, cucumber is a crop I should have grown more. I sold most of the plants. It happens, doesn't it? And Turbo Stream says, my squash was a disappointment. Third year trying to, even chose a variety suited to the British climate, and this year was probably the blooming hot. Yeah, it's a funny year this year. Buddy Cillian says, my allotment was in full sun. Not exactly perfect. I built structure to create partially shaded areas for growing. Yeah. Again, I'm with you on that. Time Stream says, my home garden now won't see any sun until late March. And Digwell says, horseradish seeds, £7.75 for 10 on eBay and a few other places. I didn't see those. Did I search eBay? I probably didn't, actually. So definitely a mission failed there, isn't it? Definitely a mission failed. That Digwell's just gone and found. But I'm always again, I was trying to find UK suppliers in my defense, because I don't like finding suppliers from abroad because of import things and stuff like that. Right, I am now going to have a bit of a rant of the week. And this follows on from an email I got from young Turbo Stream. Now, you would have heard last week that he got bit by a dog. And my rant is going along those lines because, unfortunately, I'm a dog lover, I'm an animal lover, and I would love to take Roxy down on my allotment, but she's not well behaved enough to be on the allotment with me, so I don't take her on there. And this is my rant, is that you get somebody like the owner of this dog that bit Turbo Stream, who takes their dog down there and ruins it for everybody else. And this goes up for so many things on allotments. We used to be able to have bonfires on our allotment. And one day somebody decided they were going to burn a huge amount of wood, that basically their entire allotment was just a giant bonfire. Smoked the entire place out. Houses nearby were getting smoked out. And basically, because of that, it stopped us having bonfires on the allotment. So my rant is, why are there people out there that seem to ruin it for everybody else? Why do people seem so set on doing what they think they should be able to do with no disregard for anybody else, that they ruin it for everybody else? This goes for so many things. It does go for so many things, don't get me wrong, but in the gardening world, or allotment particularly, I find it annoying that somebody has a dog and doesn't control their dog, has bonfires, doesn't control their bonfires. They use weed killers and don't care about it hurting anybody else's. The list can go on. The list can go on of things that I feel do seem to ruin it for anybody else. That's my rant. That is my rant. What gives people the right to feel that they can ruin it for everybody else? Seems expensive, Digwell, talking about the horseradish seeds, and Digwell then sees, I see a market here. I agree. I think there is a market here for radish seeds. I have to agree. Horseradish seeds, that is. Which has got me thinking about how we can make it happen. I actually want to next year set up a seed bed, or a bed for growing plants purely for seeds, so that I can start saving my own seed ready for the following year. Things like tomatoes and, well, basically a good mix of plants that we can save our seed from. And that could include horseradish. That could include horseradish. Going to have a swig of my drink coming up. But how does anybody else feel on that rant I had? Do you agree with me? Jamie says, can I ask what you would want to burn on an allotment? Well, basically wood and diseased crops is the only things I can think of. I used to have like an incinerator and a barbecue. So I used to, every time I was on the allotment, I would actually get the barbecue going and cook breakfast on the allotment, or cook quite a few things on the barbecue down on the allotment. So that's something I would want to burn, but we're not allowed to do that anymore because they banned fires and things, barbecues on the allotment, because that person decided they were going to set fire to a load of wood, completely covered it over. I mean, even the fire brigade got called out because the thick black smoke just swamped everything out. So, and I can understand that incinerators, for example, people would want to burn diseased crops. I understand that. You know, blighted tomato stems and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of debate whether blight would actually survive a composting. It probably won't. Well, it won't survive composting because it needs live material. But, you know, burning it is the best option. Tommy Stewart says, unfortunately, some people are like that. Thankfully, they are in the minority. Bonfires are banned on our allotments too. But you know, it's annoying. But I also think with what happened to Turbo Stream last week, with a dog basically biting him and the owner taking no responsibility, that's going to lead to dogs being banned on the allotment, which may not be a bad thing in some people's eyes, but there's a lot of well-behaved, well-controlled dogs out there that the owners have done everything right, and they get penalized for the wrong thing. And that's just one example. Digwell says, horseradish flowers in late spring, just don't cut them off and you'll have seeds. Okay. Idaho, thumbs up. Yeah. Oh, that reminds me, please do give us a thumbs up, a like, a follow, and subscribe. And don't forget to click the notifications so you know when we go live. Dig with no fires on our plots, full stop. I'm just using that as an example of people ruining it for others by being so selfish. Well, with a bit of luck, that plot holder probably won't be a plot holder for much longer. Yeah, I read your email. I don't think I replied actually because I'm used to replying to emails. If you want to fill in the rest of the story, please go ahead, but it is quite a lot to go through there. He had a call from the dangerous dogs unit this week too. I do feel sorry for the dog in the same breath because well, yeah, the dog did the biting, so the dog is responsible at the same time. But yeah, yeah. Get away with myself. Get away with myself there. Now, what has made you happy in the garden this week? We always want to try and come towards the end on a happy note. What has made you happy on what gardening task has made you happy this week? Now, for me, it's actually been this rain that we've had today, and this is probably bizarre that I'm happy for rain, but we need rain. It's such an important part. It's going to fill up our water butts and things like that. But I was listening to the news the other day, and I heard that some of our reservoirs are only a third full when they're normally much fuller at this time of year. And that's worrying. So we need that rain to fill up our reservoirs. We need that rain to fill up our water butts. So I'm very happy for the rain. But what's made you happy? What has made you happy this week? Chili Kit says, reminder, the clocks change next Sunday morning for our international veg growers. Yes, so next Sunday, we will still be going live at 6 in UK time, but our clocks move back an hour. So it would be 5 o'clock. Yeah, so we might be an hour earlier. Is that right? Yeah, or an hour later. No, an hour later. Move back, so an hour later. Yeah. You'll get the notifications so that you know when we go live. Is all I'll say. I thank you for reminding me that. I get very confused. I just said thank you. Bally Sydney says, I believe no such thing as a bad dog, just a bad owner. Yeah, I do agree to a point. I think there are some dogs that are not. It's not necessarily the owners. It could be the owners. But yeah, there are some dogs that are just inherently, just like there are bad people, there are some dogs that are bad as well. Hargrave Gas still getting peppers, tomatoes from my greenhouse plants. Has made me happy this week. Excellent. Yeah, it's surprising how late everything is still producing. So yeah, I can see that making you happy. Digwell says the dog may have done the biting due to poor or lack of training. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly my thoughts as well. Which is the owner's fault, but we don't know. Most likely it's the owner's fault. Turbo Stream says, my grass that is growing around my new beds made me happy this week. Excellent. Stu says, all dog but should be reported to the local police, even if the owner is responsible. Also, you need a job as dog teeth carry germs. Yeah. If you saw the things that my dog does to me, you wouldn't believe it. But yeah. Aaron Jones says, my reseeded lawn is growing very well in the cooler weather too. Fantastic. It's something to be positive about. So we want to be positive at the same time. And Digwell says, for my Thames Water says, rainfall after July has little effect on the reservoir levels as vegetation uses so much. There you go. There you go. I'm just knowing the reservoirs are very, very low at the moment. So any rain, I think, is going to help. Digwell says, still picking outdoor tomatoes and chilies here. Happy Chappie. Excellent. A lot of people still picking picking vegetables, isn't it? It's great. It's great. I think this is one of the advantages. I'm saying it's nice to get a bit of rain, but at the same time, it is nice having this sort of late autumn. We haven't had a frost. It's not that cold for this time of year. Here we are, 19th of October, going into November in 2 weeks' time, and it's not that cold. It's not that cold at all. Idaho says, my tomatoes and peppers are finally ripening. That's made me happy this week. Excuse me. Excellent. Better late than never, isn't it? So that's very happy. I mean, when did you plant your peppers and tomatoes for them to finally ripen? Obviously, I know it's different conditions to what we got. That's why I'm asking. Stuart says, still picking chilies and courgettes from the veggie pod. Indeed. Good stuff. It's really good to hear that a lot of you are still harvesting food. It's really good to hear that. Because I think that is positive. It is positive. At the end of the day, this is why we are vegetable gardeners, because we want to grow our own food all year round. Which leads me nicely onto what I want to talk to you about next week. Next week, I'm going to ask the question, what are you growing over this winter? What are you planning to grow over this winter? I'll be working out a bit more on the question, but you get the idea. I think the way I'm trying to get this show going at the moment is that we are asking a question to try and get the answers, get you to answer. And I think, based on what I've seen today, I think it works well, and opens it up for debate a bit better than having a subject. So the question for next week is, what are you going to be growing over this winter? That's what I'm going to ask this week. But we do have a few minutes to go still. If you want to suggest a cook-along or a mission, there is still time. Just start with hashtag cook-along, hashtag mission before at the beginning of your message. So far, the cook-along is pumpkin bread, and the mission is to make a hot bin, which is going to be interesting. What have we got? Nathan says, planted the garlic out finally. There's still plenty of time. It's prime time to plant your garlic, but there is still plenty of time. Digwell says, still need to do my garlic planting, but it is in the fridge pre-chilling. I didn't think you were growing garlic, Digwell. Have you changed your mind? Have we convinced you to grow your garlic? Or actually, I do recall when we spoke about it before, we had convinced you. Idaho says, peppers sown indoors April the 23rd, set out in June. Okay. See, I'll be sowing some of my sweet peppers in November, believe it or not, towards the end of November, indoors, of course, ready to get a long growing season. By the way, April the 23rd, best day of the year, because that's my birthday. Andrew says, I approve of both of those suggestions. Pumpkin bread and make a hot bin. Sounds good to me. Excellent. Well, we have got 5 minutes to go before if anybody does want to get in with a suggestion. But if you're happy with what we got, just leave it bare. I think I don't really. I'm struggling to think of what to talk about to fill in these last 5 minutes. So I'm going to throw it over to you. Somebody asked me a question. Ask me a question to fill in the last few minutes, and I will try and answer it, because I've covered everything that I've made notes for. I thought we might have to roll a draw around this time, but it's working well. But let's throw out a question. Throw me a question, and I will try to answer it to fill in the end of this week. Digler says, after my success with Tesco garlic this year, I'm growing it again. 32 bulbs grown for a £1.10 outlay. There you go. There you go. It's good, isn't it? It just shows that you can grow stuff that you buy from a supermarket quite easily and save a bit of money. I know, like seed potatoes, they say you shouldn't because they're not certified as seed potatoes. And I think that's the same with garlic. They're not certified. So there is a risk you could bring in some contamination, but I don't know if that's going to be the case. Question. My butternut squash are quite small. What can I do with them? Are they fully ripe? If they're fully ripe, then you just put them into winter storage. Get the skin hard and put them into somewhere cool, dry and dark, and they will be fine. They'll just be small. If they're not quite ripe, then flood them with a load of water to try and get them to bulk up. There's still time for them to ripen. So don't worry too much. But to get them big, just need to add plenty of water. What is the Pythagoras formula? So Pythagoras formula is to do with triangles, and it's when you add two of the angles together, you get the angle of the other angle, if I remember correctly. That's it. Balancing best way to fumigate a polytunnel. Smoke bombs, probably the best way, or trying to think of a natural way to fumigate a polytunnel. Get some natural predators in there to fugate, or not fumigate, but to attack any pests. Natural predators. What have we got? Will my fennel last over winter? Quick question. It will probably die back, but it will come back again next winter if you leave the bulbs in the ground. I've had it growing for several years, just leaving the bulbs in the ground. I like these quick fire questions. Andrew says, I know manure beds need to be well rotten before potting it on the garden, but can I just add compost even if it has not been broken down for some time? Yeah, if it's rotted down, I mean, if you take a hot bin, that can produce compost in 3 months. So it doesn't necessarily need time. It's more about it being broken down. But if you're doing it at this time of year, you're not going to plant straight into it straight away. Then there's no harm in putting it in there onto the beds and let it break down in the beds. That's my answer to that. Hargrave says, I think they're ripe, just small. Then you can just put them into storage and use them like normal. You may not get a huge amount of flesh, so you might need to use 2 or 3 to be equivalent to what you would get normally. They're talking about the butternut squashes there. Digler says, garlic is not germination treated, unlike some spuds. Yeah, slight difference there. Right, well, it is pretty much 7:30. I quite liked that quick questions at the end. I thought that was quite a good way to end. We might have to do that in the future if you like it, or perhaps we'll try and feature that in a little bit more, another segment. Anyway, it is 7:30, so it's time now to get out of here, pack up for the weekend and get ready to return. Well, for me, return back to work tomorrow and go throughout our week. But we will be back again next Sunday at 6 p.m. Don't forget the clocks change, so we be an hour later, I think. I get confused. Just check when it. Of course, I put it out at about 4 o'clock. I put out the post saying when we're going live, but it's 6 p.m. UK time every Sunday, so you know. But we will be back again next Sunday at 6 p.m. We're going to talk about what are you overwintering this winter? What are you growing over winter this winter? Right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've had some fun. I hope you've had some laughs. It's been a good one. I've really enjoyed it tonight. Thank you so much. I'll see you again next Sunday at 6. Bye for now.